Good morning. This is the Community Redevelopment Agency Workshop on Budget Allocations. It's Monday, September 30th, 2019 at 10:02. Can you please call the roll?
Chair Llewellyn.
Here.
Vice Chair Odman.
Here.
Board Member Brandebart.
Here.
Board Member Harris.
Here.
Board Member James.
Here.
CRA Director Williams.
Raquel, are you here? Just calling the roll.
Here.
I'm sorry.
City Attorney Ansbro.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay. Before we get started, I believe our city manager just got back from the place at Dania Beach and has an update for us.
Good morning, everyone. Anna Garcia, City Manager. So we just spent about 30 minutes this morning with Ricky, the property management, and Lincoln, who's heading up the restoration efforts. The whole weekend we had employees there from Friday all through the weekend. So the update that we've been given is that residents can begin to come back to the place, to the building. The conditions are not optimal, but some of the concerns that you have are being addressed. Wherever there's a cord or an extension cord of any kind, there is bright tape covering it to prevent anybody from tripping. Wherever there's a cord at the entrance to someone's apartment, there is a bright tape so people don't trip. Anytime that you have, whether in your homes or in an apartment, for any of you that have experiences, either by a pipe breaking or an AC leak, water doesn't dry overnight, folks. It takes time to dry. We went floor by floor. It's going to take time to dry. No one has said that the conditions are optimal, but residents have a choice to be able to come back. Some units are not affected at all. Some units are perfectly fine. And the ones that have been affected are part of this extreme drying process. So you do see a lot of fans throughout in the corners. We make sure that nothing is blocking the hallways, and that nothing is blocking any of the entryways. We can always learn. They can always learn, but the efforts from our part and their part have been beyond what anybody could expect it. I know because I've experienced this on a personal level. So they're working around the clock. We've spoken to some residents that were very, very happy to be able to get back. Some have made the choice to stay. Some just went back to collect their belongings, and they're going to go back to the hotel. Very happy that we were able to move so quickly and provide options for them for places to go. But at the end of the day, between our building official and all our inspectors, from electrical to structural, we have cleared. Everything else that's going on now falls within the responsibility of the management and the ownership. We're always open to critique. We're always open to any ideas you may have going forward. I don't have to tell you the things that we've encountered here, whereas pools that I've had to shut down because the electric hasn't been grounded, or local restaurants or the Nybert Swanson. We are used to dealing with things that are not right. And what we do when things are not right, we work to take the steps to make them right. So if anybody had any questions.
Board Member Brandemar.
Anna, as you know, there were 55 texts, but none of them had my name on it. Between you and this city commission, with tremendous amount of praises for people that were doing their job. That's what they get paid for. All it was I praised this one, I praised that one, I praised this one. They're getting paid to do their job. Number one, I did not get involved in those texts because a lot of them defeated and broke the Sunshine Law. You just don't do that, especially when it's something that's going to be brought up before us. And since you and the mayor choose to let you address this situation here, it only proves my point even further to Tom Ansborough. Your chat rooms on things that happen in the city doesn't help anybody. In fact, it's a great way to set somebody up to have to go before an OIG because of a sunshine violation. Like I said, out of 55 texts, none of them were mine, number one. Number two, 717 condo unit over there reported that leak a week before it happened. They went in and they fixed it. So they say. Yet a week later, that leak happened again. You're right about the fact that it's their responsibility, but it's ours to put up a stink about allowing them to go back in, and I'll tell you why. Every Christmas, whenever condo associations put up Christmas decorations, or even here at City Hall, they are stopped from doing that because even with the tape over it, as you said, it is a hazard. It is not safe. And your best thing that you just brought up right now is when there's water damage and there's thousands of tons of water that were in that swimming pool, it isn't dried up. Mold sets in very fast, I was told by authorities. And right now, I'm going on Facebook when I leave here, and I'm going to tell them on Facebook that it's a damn lie saying that the commission said that it's safe, because maybe they say it's safe. I say it's still unsafe. And the owners should have stepped up to the plate. On top of that, Anna, we have to open our eyes. We were not so greatly prepared. If we were, we wouldn't have thrown those people out on Federal Highway to line up in lines of 90. Do you realize that, thank God, this to me was our hurricane? You got to work harder on finding a better answer for us, where to put the people in the event of a disaster. Nobody else cared about us, and you seem to care about us. Where would you have put it if it was Avery? Where would you have put these people? In fact, at 11 o'clock at night, the last text I read was that the last of the people were put in a room. That's not accomplishment. To me, it was nothing. I don't feel we succeeded in anything. I feel it's a failure because we got no place to send them. Even if we had put up cots in IT Parker, these people had to have their own money, which is still something I don't understand, in order to pay $90 for a hotel. Where the hell was this company? And in the future, we better never have this kind of a situation with all of the buildings that we already have approved. We got to be more prudent. I don't know what we're doing here, because I want to reiterate the fact that I don't want to hear praises from Mark or well, him, it's different. I don't want to hear praises on this one and that one. I want to see the action being done. And you know who the best hero is? The quiet hero. Now, what is going to come out of this? People getting raises or people getting promotions?
Raises?
I don't know. Raises.
Okay.
All right. Or getting promotions, but they only did their job, what they get paid for.
May I?
Go right ahead.
Yes.
Go right ahead.
So anything having to do with violating the sunshine, I'm not here to police my bosses. That is for you all to do. Tom was included in that information. So, you know, you can either have too much information or not at all. I'm trying to gauge it to see how you guys like it. I'm trying to check the temperature. So I always said that we could always learn from how we've done things. There is nothing to compare. I mean, you've had past administrations, and you can gauge how you prepared for hurricanes, where there was the way you gave out sands, to how the people worked through the weekend, at night, didn't sleep, worked on a holiday. It's my management style to be grateful to my people, and that's never going to change. And if you don't want that type of manager that's going to elevate people when they're tired and they're weary, just by being grateful and patting them in the back, then I'm certainly not the type of manager that you would want here in the city. But one thing I will tell you, I always say that it's much easier to critique the doer of the deeds. So I will continue to be the doer of the deeds, even if I am criticized, even if my people are criticized, because we know the effort that we are putting forward. Once this whole investigation is complete, rest assured, Commissioner, that we're going to take a look at everything. I wasn't here when this building was permitted. I don't know who even permitted. It could have been the county. I don't know if what caused this was due to a leak. I don't know that. And I want to try to get away from giving specifics, because it's very easy to find that little pebble that was left that wasn't picked up. And I'm absolutely fine with it. But again, I'm extremely happy with the effort. And like I said, there's always room to learn and to do things better. If there would have been a manual or something that I inherited in regards to what we do with the people, I would have certainly followed that. But maybe I will be the one to put that manual together. Okay, Commissioner?
That's exactly what I'm hoping for, because this is only the beginning, Anna.
Yes.
This is only the beginning. This was our hurricane. When we had the hurricane, a person that you know, which I would tell you in confidence, actually brought to the back parking lot here trucks of food that we hand delivered even to people. I saw none of that camaraderie this time.
That would have been a
Publix
great
with
suggestion.
snacks.
If there would have been,
No,
folks,
they
don't
didn't
hold
do it
something
this
back if you
time.
have information. I'll be more than happy to receive that information.
Well, that is
Because I know that
exactly
Publix
what
was
they
here
did.
with water for the people.
That's
We-
different.
Yes, we could have had an injury, we could have had a fatality, we could have had
We
someone
didn't.
hurt, and we didn't.
But I don't think it's safe for them to be back in there, and I want to go on record as saying so, and whoever went in there and looked at the place and said it is, let them be held responsible.
Sure.
Vice Chair?
Thank you for the update, Manager. I think Commissioner Brandon Marty has a lot of valid points, and I think we all have a lot of thoughts and feelings about how it went. But being that we're 15 minutes into the workshop for the CRA, I think it would be better if, we met with you one-on-one.
Certainly.
We went over each of our individual concerns, and we could talk about it that way, since, anything I have to say about it is lengthy. That way we're not taking up more time for the
No doubt, I'm
CRA.
always available, as you know.
All right, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Manager.
Thank you. Okay, items for discussion. First item is the fiscal year 2020 budget, unallocated funds, potential projects.
Okay, good morning, CRA Board. As you may recall, at our special meeting, it was decided that certain projects be reduced or eliminated. And there was about $15,000 worth of unallocated funds that was put into our reserve account. And the request at the special meeting was that this be discussed at the workshop to determine if any of the projects should move forward in some capacity, or that these funds remain unallocated in the reserve. And so I placed this on the agenda with some information regarding which projects were reduced or removed. And it's open for your discussion.
Commissioner Harris? Board Member Harris, sorry.
I wanted to speak to the $15,000 in the unallocated funds. What I would like to do would be in $5,000 increments. First, give $5,000 to Gangrel's Wrestling, because we had to cut him by $10,000, but we can give him $5,000 back. The second $5,000 will go to the Dania Beach anniversary event in the way of awards and notification of the pioneers or what have you when we come up with an agenda for that. And also, when we have the 110 event, we can make that anyone who wants to come, but put a price on it of about $10, and then all that money goes to the Historical Society, and we can raise money that way. Any money left from the second $5,000 would go to the Historical Society, and then the proceeds from the event would go to the Historical Society. And the third $5,000 I would like to keep for sponsorships, for maybe like the Mayor's Gala or the Broward League of Cities, or the Lions Club, or any of those events that we attend. But the first 5,000, I think, should go to Craig for his work with the wrestling. So that takes up the whole 15,000 right there.
Board Member James?
Yes, thank you. Excuse me. There are a lot of projects that were on this list that were cut. I think the fair thing to do is to look at things in the list of seniority. I don't think that just giving 5 to Craig and then giving 5 to 115th, I think we already discussed and took off on both ends the 115th celebration. We voted to do that altogether. I think that in the past, what the city has done in many budgets is you have capital projects and they took it out of reserves. We did not have the support to do that with the same with the CRA. I do not have a list of all of the projects and the timeline that they had consensus to move forward on, but I think that the fair thing to do would to be to look at the seniority list, and I know that. Thank you. So you had expanded holiday lighting, travel and training, pride events, bike sharing, then wrestling. But wrestling probably should have been moved up because I do know that it was sort of in the conversation last year. So that might have more seniority over anything. But for the rest of them, I think that it should go in list of seniority so that it could be a fair process. That's my, I know that putting 5 here, 5 there, I mean 5 just to pay for awards. Awards for what? Something that we voted that wasn't going to happen unless there's other conversation that's not being disclosed here.
I know Board Member Brandon Marty has her light on, but I have to just add one thing that I just like to put in my 2 cents. I actually think the wrestling should be moved up to the top. Because I know that there were plans that were made with that, and I know that Gangrels did go and try to reduce their budget for this even further in order to try to work with us so that we could provide them with something. So I would actually be in favor of putting $7,500 towards the wrestling in order to get it closer to where it was that we had discussed with them previously, and given everything that they've done with the city. As far as the other funding, I personally am fine if it just stays in the reserves and just gets held there, and then if something comes up and we need it for something, then we can address it at that point. Board Member Brandon Marty?
Yes, at that last meeting, I agreed to go back and get Gangrels to lower their price, and they did. They lowered it down to $8,000. That's the lowest that they can go with it. They can't go any lower than $8,000. Being the fact that they put out the money for the planes, and everything with the first one that's coming up, which is our cancer benefit, the plane rides, he was able to get the hotel rooms at a huge discount. I think it's at Cambria Suites. But for our other event, the most that they can go down is $8,000, and I informed our CRA director, that's the bottom. And I got that down from 10.
Vice Chair?
I was going to speak about the 115 event at our next meeting, but since we're kind of already talking about it, I'll briefly put in my thoughts. My interpretation was that we took away funding for the event, not the event itself, as it's a donated event. We took away the money for the event. That's how I interpreted what happened. That said, I think it's something worthy of looking at putting in a small investment for doing. It ties in with a lot of things that are going into the city. We've had 2 articles that heavily mention it. I know a lot of residents were looking forward to it, and it seems like something we can do with really very minimal cost. So I would like to look at putting that back on and doing that. And like Bill said, it ties into a historical society that is in the process of being formed. a lot of residents are just really getting emotionally invested in that and investing their time. So, you know, I hope that we can maybe work that in as well. As I didn't see us removing the event altogether, just the funding allocated for it.
Board Member James.
Yes, when the funding was removed for Dang It After Dark, the event was removed for Dang It After Dark, and that was why both events were said, if we couldn't have one, we weren't going to have both, and that was what was discussed at the meeting. And furthermore, if this is still something that was happening, I haven't heard anything else about it, not the process of how it's going to happen. I haven't been a part of it at all. None of us have been briefed on anything, how tickets are going to be distributed, the concerns that the residents have had, because if we're allocating the tickets to certain people, that means only certain people could come. We don't have a free event for them, because a free open event that everyone could attend, because we took all of the funding from Dang It After Dark, which is why we said we were going to not have either one of them. I would be more in favor of just giving that allocation of the money to the Historical Society. The event is next month, literally next month, and I haven't seen one plan of how anything is going to go, how the invites look. I'm definitely not in favor of giving a dime to the 115th event that is not open to all of the public, or we don't have a process of people purchasing tickets. We haven't even workshopped this event. It's being thrown together, or maybe being planned in private without the rest of us being a part of it. I don't think it's a good look to just give a small piece to the CRA to try to make something happen at a Day After Dark at this point, when it's a month away. But I do know that at the meeting, the discussion, when we took away the funding, we took away the event at Day After Dark, because you can't have it without the funding, and that's why we took it away from the other one. Now, unless y'all want to disclose some meetings that y'all done had that I don't know about, or how the process is going to go that I don't know about, I'm unsure of how all of this is going to work in the span of 4 to 5 weeks.
Respond real quick and then come back, or no?
I just wanted to answer real quick.
Commissioner Harris, do you mind if the Vice Chair? Go ahead.
I just quickly wanted to respond. So, to my knowledge, there's been no meetings about the 115th event. A week or maybe 2 weeks ago, I approached the manager and asked if it was something we could look at. We could look at again, and we haven't really done any specific planning. We've just said that it seemed like something worth revisiting, and I asked her to place it on the agenda, and that's really as far as it's gone. There's been no secret meetings or no any kind of meetings. So, I mean, it can be done without the money. It's going to be a public event. It's going to be a much more, I think we can just do it a really kind of homegrown, kind of fun event. But, if that's not the, Well, we can sell tickets, and I maybe sponsor the living dignitaries in the city, however many there are. But yeah, of course, it would be open to everyone in the city, and it would just be kind of a laid-back, fun brunch. Again, if it's not the will of the board to allocate any money for that, then we can just talk with Tropical Acres and see what they want to do.
What's the occupancy there?
Well, that's what I was about to say, is that we'd have to limit it, obviously.
Yeah,
as to
so
how
it has
many
to be, it's
people
not
that-
open to 30-plus thousand
There would
residents.
probably be a
Obviously.
limited number of tickets, that would
Like
be sold,
200.
and then at that point, it would be closed. I mean, we'd have to do it that way, because we can't just have
Need a
people coming.
workshop.
Right.
in.
However many tickets we could sell, if Tropical Acre says you have room for 200, I would say, okay, sponsor I don't know how many living dignitaries we have. Let's say it's 40, and then the rest, everyone else can pay somewhere between $10 and $20 to enjoy the brunch. So it wouldn't be just that we all get to invite our own personal best friends or anything like that. Everyone pays to enter. Again, it's just an idea. It seemed like a really fun event, and I'm just trying to save it because I think that there was a lot of people who are looking forward to it.
And I think it would benefit the Historical Society.
Well, yeah, I mean, it all kind of ties in. 115th isn't a huge birthday, but it is a birthday, and it's the birthday of Tropical Acres, which is iconic in Dania Beach, and it all just seemed to work together nicely. If we can still make it work together nicely, then I think that's great for the residents. If we can't, you know,
Board Member Harris.
it's up to you.
No, I was just going to reiterate what Lauren just said about the event, and the proceeds of the event, of the ticket sales, go to the Historical Society, and would also maybe give you a chance to put some of the Historical Society items on display the day of the event whenever we have it. I don't know what the actual day of the event is, but if we move it out a little bit farther, like in December, early December, or next year, or do it the right way. You know, there's a lot of things that we can do, and I think the $5,000 would help us do that. You know, if we want to get a red carpet and, you know, some extra decorations, but the proceeds of the ticket sales would go to the Historical Society or a scholarship fund.
Board Member Brandon Marty.
I'm not running for office, so I think you people should really step back and think about this. Everything you do should be for everybody. Not this side can go and that side can't go. Why would you be doing this to yourselves? I have no idea. If you don't think you're going to make enemies of people, you're wrong. I got to be honest, the idea of embellishing the Dania After Dark. I really did. Plus, I want to tell you something. 115 ain't no big deal. 120 would be a year that I would say, wow, 120 years. 115, I don't know where that came from. But I am not for saying this residents can go because they're elites or whatever it is, and these residents over here, they can't go. If you embellished the Dania After Dark and made it free, that's what you call a celebration. If you're here to raise funds for certain organizations, then that's what it's about. It ain't about the city of Dania Beach having an anniversary party. It's either a fundraiser for the Lions and the ones that were mentioned, or it's for our residents celebrating how many years that some people have been living here. But I am not for saying yes to say Mimi and no to Patty. It ain't going to work that way. That's not right. Or yes to Bobby Grace because she's a dignitary, right, Bobby? And no to Nikki because she's not. I don't know how that would work, Nikki. You don't pick and choose which people can go. That's not the right way to do a celebration for an entire city. So it's showing me it's either a fundraiser for these clubs that you're talking about, Commissioner, or is it going to be a celebration of life for everybody in Dania? I say hold off on this celebration because right now it's not planned right at all.
How about if we did 8,000 to Gangrels, since that's as low as they could go, and then there's still 7,000 left over, and if we put some of that towards Dania After Dark for the 115 and some of that back into the Tropical Acres thing. Into the Tropical Acres 115th. So this way both events are still going on, and it includes the entire city. My suggestion, that's all. Executive Director, please.
Sure. I just want to provide some clarity. No funding in the CRA's budget can go toward the Tropical Acres event as it's outside of the CRA. So any discussion of how this funding will be used for 115th, it would have to be within the confines of the CRA's budget, the CRA's projects. If you want to do, you know, a limited themed version of it at Dania After Dark, that's something that we can still salvage and, you know, try to get that back on track. But we cannot be spending for red carpets out at Tropical Acres or, you know, things of that nature because our budgets are separate. And I believe the Tropical Acres discussion of the 115th was specific to what the city's planning and involvement was going to be. Dania After Dark was more so for the general public, the free admission aspect of the event. So I just want to make that clear.
I don't mean to interrupt, but we could take some of that money, though, that ended up being allocated into the CRA and put it back to the city.
Our budget has been adopted. We cannot just be
Nikki?
crossing funds back and forth.
Let me ask Nikki, just if
as
there's a way to
such.
do that.
Hold on.
Both the CRA and the city budget can be amended at any time. It would just take an action of both boards. So the CRA board would have to vote to transfer the money back to the city, whatever they deem necessary, and then the city would have to accept it on their end. And vice versa. It's no different than if the CRA were to come mid-year or at some point in time and request additional funds from the city. Both boards would need to accept it on both sides.
Thank you. Were you finished?
On that note, yes, and that is correct. But we can't just discuss it and it's done. It would have to be, in the process that Ms. Satterfield specified.
Okay. Board Member James.
Yes, I don't even believe we're having a conversation of putting money back from the CRA to the city's budget when, okay, that's not something that I would be in favor of. We're trying to find a long-term solution here, even to how to fund the CRA. So if you really wanted to look at funds, you can go line item by line item as y'all did with the CRA with the city and see if you can find money that way. But to say you're going to give money back to the city from the CRA when it was already a huge obstacle in the first place, and to fund a party just speaks a lot on the priorities of certain individuals of this board. Now, I would be in favor of changing the date. Maybe it can be like a New Year's bang celebration, something like that, or something that's done, because I don't know about everyone else. I don't want to do things that are thrown together. That was the reason why it was put off in the first place because, from the beach, because we realized we didn't have enough time in order to do it the right way. But I guess since I don't even know what for sure is being donated and sponsored, we haven't received a list of that. This hasn't been very transparent. All we've been told is that we have sponsorships, but from who? How much? How much money is it worth? Where are they going to? What's the line item for all of those things? Like, we have to have a line item. We made the CRA come back with a line item of the funds that will be spent at Day After Dark. However, I had not seen any line items of anything for Tropical Acres. I don't know if anyone else has, but I haven't. And so I'm not in favor of doing it this quick. If we can find a way to do it the right way, where we can all be proud of an event that's being thrown together collectively, if we're doing this as a unit at a later date, I would be in support of doing that on both ends, but not just in 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks. I know Commissioner Harris knows how to put events together, and knowing that one that is going to be that you would want to be a very nice event that you want to put your name on, it takes more than a month to put together. And so those are just my 2 cents. Again, I would rather just give the rest of the money to the Historical Society, since that seems to be what the consensus wants to give money to. I'm fine with that, versus trying to rush and put an event together because we put something out in the newspaper. So that's my comments.
Just a minute. Look, we can't make the decisions about the Tropical Acres event here. We've already decided that. We can make the decisions, though, about the other items. And I know there have been several people who have talked about gangrels. I want to know if we're going to be able to put money aside for that first. Can we have
I'm
a
okay with
consensus
it.
on that? All right, so 8,000, I think 8,000 is that's what they said that they need, and they've cut their budget multiple times. So I think that's fair. Do we have a consensus on that? Yes. Okay. I know Ms. Grace has been raising her hand over there. Did you wish to speak? If we can try to keep it brief, because we have another item to go to. Please state your name and
Bobby
address.
Grace, 110 Northwest 8th Avenue, Dania Beach, Florida. I'm old school, so I have to reach back to those people that did a lot with nothing. And when I say that, I truly mean how we did funds and functions in the city of Dania Beach. And Tudy Adler was one of those people that I've always looked up to, because he could put together a function, just making his barbecue sauce and inviting the whole community to come. So this is my thought. Everybody is got who they want to come and all this stuff. But I think that in order for us to celebrate anything in the city of Dania Beach, whether it's the 10th anniversary, the 100th birthday, 115th, that everybody in the city of Dania Beach who is a resident should be invited to the function. I like the idea that Dania After Dark, but I want to go beyond that because I think that we can open it up to a week after Dania After Dark, bring out all of the tables and put them around City Hall, have vendors from our restaurants come, have the city of Dania Beach bring music for entertainment, and have a celebration that everybody in the city of Dania Beach will be able to benefit from. Now, we did the 110th birthday celebration in 9 months. Am I correct? $65,000. No funding from the city. We did it so that the event that we had at the Amazing Gallery funded everything that we did on that Saturday for everybody in the city of Dania Beach at no charge. And I really want to keep it in that concept that we inclusively include everybody in the city of Dania Beach as residents that are taxpayers, that are voters, that you were elected to serve, to make sure that they will be able to come to this event. I think it will be a great venue if we just all around the circle there, all out there where the bands and stuff come, all of this area, have it just set up like a birthday celebration. And I am betting you 100%, if you reach out to the Broward County Commissioners, they will support this event 100%. This is my thought. Tootie taught me a lot about networking and putting stuff together because he said, okay, so this is what we're going to do this weekend. Talked to a couple of people, and we got 500-600 people. You know what I'm saying? You don't want to exclude the residents of the city of Dania Beach. You really, truly don't want to do that because I've heard some vibes already about the 115th birthday celebration. Like, I'm not coming, and if they invite this person and they don't invite me, that's
I'm going to need to cut you off.
I'm going to be kind of sad about the whole event. And so let's rethink this as elected officials and put it together so it would be inclusive of all the residents of Dania Beach. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grace. I think that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to figure out a way to do this with Dania After Dark, which would be the inclusive project. So if that is something that's still salvageable, yes.
So we can definitely modify. Are you looking at the balance after we take out the $8,000 for Gangrels Wrestling for the balance to be allocated towards Dania After Dark?
And then we'll do what we need to do if we want to continue the other one as well. I guess that would be the best way to do it. Does anybody have any suggestions other than me? I already heard your suggestion, yes. Does anybody else have any suggestions? Does anybody want to make a suggestion as to what we do with the remainder of the money?
So that leaves how much money that you, that we would be giving for Dania After Dark?
$7,380.
And wasn't the original amount 20,000?
10,000.
10,000? I mean, I'm just trying to think of how much we, is that the best way that we want to spend it and to make a celebration? Do we want to do something later on? I don't know.
I mean, I still say that we could allocate some of that money to go back over to the other event through the city as opposed to through the CRA. And then we deal with the future issues of budgeting. That's a separate issue. We're talking about the current budget that we've already approved. So if we could put some of that aside, send it back over to the city so there is some funding, minimal funding. I don't even think you need a lot. and then use whatever's remaining here for Danny After Dark. This way, it encompasses both portions. It would be a shame to waste a almost fully sponsored event, especially if it's something that we could raise some funds for the Historical Society. It would be a nice way to do it. And just giving the money to the Historical Society, I think kind of defeats the purpose. I like the idea of the community putting in the money towards the Historical Society, because then we're all a part of it. Anyway.
The only thing I would say, Chair, is that, I do agree with Board Member James that for the very small amount of money that we realistically need for the project, we could probably find it within the city, or we can get it from, right. I feel like we could find whatever small amount we need from the city without having to do any kind of transfer. And I think we can salvage it from the city end. And let it be a city issue versus messing around with the CRA budget. So then I guess the question is, if we're happy to send that money over for the Danny After Dark, I think that's fine, and do an augmented Danny After Dark celebration.
Board Member James.
Yes, I almost forgot what I was about to say. I think I forgot what I was about to say. As far as, again, we allocated $10,000 initially. Oh, what I was about to say is, I would like, if we're still talking about, clearly, we're still talking about having an event at Tropical Acres, I would like to sit down as a group and discuss that at a separate workshop. We still have a lot of things we need to discuss, and we spent a large majority of time, and we haven't really reached a consensus on anything other than gang grills. I would like to suggest that we have a separate workshop with Tropical Acres and all of us, so we can all be a part of whatever planning is that supposed to be going on. Because just saying that we're going to give the rest to the CRA to do a Danny After Dark and still try and find some funds to do, like, what awards are we giving out? We haven't agreed on any awards to be given out, to whom they're going to be given out to. There are a lot of decisions that have to be made. And so my suggestion would be have a separate workshop for this possibility, for a possibility of having this, to see if we can be on board for this together. Because if this is not something that we are all agreeing on, and something that we feel like is going to be something that we can put our names on, I don't think it's fair for one or two people to plan the event. So, I mean, I would like to sit down again with Tropical Acres and us all have a workshop to see what exactly is being sponsored, saying like almost fully funded. I want to know what's not funded, what is funded, for how many people, what messages we're going to be putting out, what the graphics and the design is going to be, the colors that it's going to be, the theme that it's going to be, any of that. So that's my suggestion.
I just have to address this one thing, just because I have to. We didn't workshop anything to do with the Danny After Dark as far as what the agenda was there. An agenda was presented. I think it would be perfectly fine if the city staff brings us an agenda. We could then take a look at it. If we like it, we like it. If we don't, we don't. The same thing has been done with other events in the city that yourself, Commissioner James, that you have put together, including the cemetery. Okay, well, you put together, it was your event, but you put together an agenda and presented it to us just last week. So, and we had no participation at all in anything to do with that. So it's
not my event.
You're the one who presented it. Regardless of that, the bottom line is that I don't know that we need an entire workshop for this. I think all we simply need is an agenda to be presented and an idea of what it is that's going to be done. And if we can get that, say by the end of the week, or even by the beginning of next week, because we have a meeting next week, if we could have something by the end of the week, maybe it could be presented at the next meeting next week, then we could get a better sense of it and see where we're going with it. And if it means we have to change the date, then perhaps we can change the date. But I don't think we need an entire workshop to discuss this entire thing. Commissioner Brandon Marty.
Yeah, to the mayor. Mayor, Jack is being very good in
Yes.
what he's offered, but here's my problem with this. It holds more than the amount of people he's willing to give food for. You could easily get 400 people in there, because I've done it. It's, but yet he's put a quota limit, right, on how many people.
I don't know. I don't know.
Well,
that-
if you don't know, then that makes sense what Commissioner James is saying. How many people are we going to treat as special? Because that's what it amounts to. And like I say, it holds more than 400 people. We take the wall down just for ours. And that's a 150 for Christmas, so I don't understand. How many is he willing? I agree with meeting with Jack or getting an agenda like you said. I don't agree with a workshop either. That's one place I don't agree with a workshop. We don't need it on this, but I want to know why it's limited. I thought you had said only 100 and something people. How many people?
Never said. Never said. I know, I think Jim Silvernail was here, and he said that they've had 300 people there before.
Sure.
But I don't know if that's what the total number is at this point, and a total number was not discussed at the time.
All right, can
So
we find out
we
from
can
Jack
certainly-
what he would
That's
feel
what I'm
comfortable
saying.
with?
That's what I'm saying. If we could just have an agenda and some final information that maybe can
That
be
makes-
presented on
that
Monday
makes
at the
sense.
next meeting, that would be best.
Monday.
We have a meeting on Monday, yes.
That makes more sense right there, because it holds a lot more people.
And my understanding is that the sponsorship was for the food and the drinks. So anything to do with food and drinks in the space, that's what was funded. That's why I'm talking about partial sponsorship. If there was anything else that wanted to be done, that's what we would have to pay for. Board Member Harris. Okay. Executive Director.
I know we're talking about Tropical Acres once again. Are we entertaining Dania After Dark still?
I believe we are.
And at what level of funding?
That's what we're trying to get back to. Board Member James?
Yeah, I guess I'm not really supporting either one of them because, as I said, I don't know enough of the specifics. Again, the cemetery event wasn't mine. A resident came to me, came to this commission, so that event was not mine. I brought an agenda back. When I brought the initial things here, nothing else was said from anyone up here, so I took matters in my own hand to ensure an event happened between the city and the CRA. This is something that is ours, regardless of how anyone is looking at it. This is ours. We all sit on this board, and this is 115th event. I'm not sure how much the CRA could do with the funding for a day after dark, and at this time, to make it look good, or if it's going to look cheap, don't do it. I know you're going to have like additional security and those other things, but I don't know how much of the money is really going to go to like the actual upgraded parts of the event. So I'm really not in favor of either one of them, if you ask my opinion.
Vice Chair?
I would like to get what I think is really the more important part of this workshop, which is going on to the contribution and city TIF discussion. That said, before we go on to that, I would like to see if there's consensus for the remaining amount of money to go to already within the CRA to be used for the augmented Dania After Dark event.
I'm fine with that.
Is there a third? Harris. All right, that's
So we have
three.
consensus. All right, so the next item is budget strategy beyond fiscal year 2020. Is that?
Okay, for this item, based on the budget workshop and the special meeting that occurred on September 11th and September 12th respectively, the board determined that there needed to be a thoughtful discussion about how the CRA would be funded for future years. And I'm very happy for the acknowledgement that we need to have this discussion and come to some sort of determination. Some of the issues that have brought us to this point, and I think represent the basis for why this workshop was requested, is that funding for the CRA from the general fund allocation has been flat over the past several years, going back to 2015. We have taken on additional personnel costs. We have net growth in personnel costs of about $125,000. In addition, we have taken on new programs, and also with the requirement to continue ongoing programs that were established even prior to my joining the CRA. For the fiscal year 2019 and 2020 budgets, I recommended or requested additional funding for new or ongoing projects as approved by the CRA board or as requested by the CRA board, which would require funding beyond our annual funding. And so in the memo I provided in Table 1, you'll see that in the annual funding section, that number has remained the same. The administrative cost allocation year after year, whatever that formula has been, that has been included in the funding from the general fund, as well as a contribution to the Arts and Seafood Celebration year after year in that $10,000 number as shown in Table 1. So in Table 1, other contributions per city commission, those were additional funds that were requested to cover programs or initiatives that were requested and approved by the CRA board. So of course, at the special meeting and at the budget workshop, there was discussion of the budget being unbalanced or being in a deficit. And I really do believe, and I have the unwavering recommendation that we need to really look at the CRA's budget allocation in a more realistic fashion, so that we have the capacity to do the things that we, as the CRA and as the CRA board, that we have set out to do and accomplish in the redevelopment area. I did highlight in the package a ordinance from 2011 that was adopted on second reading by the City Commission of the City of Dania Beach, that provided for a covenant to budget and appropriate legally available funds to pay an amount equal to the city's annual contribution to the tax increment financing of the City of Dania Beach CRA for the term of the CRA. Now, we did have some discussion of tax increment financing on August 27th when the budget was first presented. It was also included when the proposed budget was provided to you on August 20th. I do recall a question about whether, the TIF number is like a real number, a real thing. It actually is based on Florida statutes and as outlined in the ordinance that was adopted in January of 2011. Now, tax increment financing from the city is not something that is uncommon. It is something that most CRAs count on as revenue, in addition to funding from the county through county TIF. This CRA was not established initially with county TIF, as most of you are aware. But what I can determine based on the agenda memo and the ordinance from 2011 is that the previous commission, or the commission at that time, foresaw having to have a defined mechanism to determine how the CRA should be funded. Now, for whatever reasons, and there may be various reasons, the city of Dania Beach determined to do a general fund allocation in lieu of TIF, and as a result, I am not sure of why the annual funding has been what it has been. That has not been communicated to me in any definitive way. And so I would like us to get to a place where we have a defined, defensible, justifiable way to appropriate funding to the CRA from the city of Dania Beach. And I think that the TIF model, as presented in the ordinance that was adopted, I think that is the best strategy. I gave some benefits, excuse me, for why I think this would be the ideal solution, and that's also in your backup. Number one, I think it would create less ambiguity, so provide more certainty surrounding what the contribution from the city will be, and this will facilitate prudent short-term and long-term planning and budgeting. Justifiable contribution, the budget is defined based on a formula of incremental increases to the taxable value rather than arbitrary allocations. Number three, compliance, bring City of Dania Beach in compliance with the adopted ordinance. Number four, performance-based. It incentivizes the CRA to pursue, encourage, and promote redevelopment, whether through entrepreneurial means, investment, or becoming more enterprising. Carry forward fund balance. What you'll notice in Table 3 provided in the memo is that, you know, there's several CRAs that appear to have large budgets, but you'll see that a lot of their revenue is from carry forward fund balance from the previous year. So just imagine that from the time those CRAs were created, they've been able to carry forward funds year after year after year, and, you know, potentially set aside those funds for special large projects or to go after certain grants that need a match. We do have challenges sometimes even when looking to leverage our funding by going after grants. If we don't have the matching dollars, then the grant is out of reach for us. And so that is one of the benefits as well. Number 6, CRA reserves and contingency. I know there's a lot of reverence for the reserve of the city and to make sure that the city has the appropriate level of reserves. But we also need to take into account that the CRA needs to have the appropriate level of reserves and contingency funds for unforeseen circumstances or changes in the economy. So having additional funding will enable us to get to the place where we can be more responsible about our reserves and about our contingency. What I want to focus on also is that, you know, when you have the funding to do certain things within the parameters of the CRA plan and within Florida Statutes 163, Chapter 163, Part 3, you are able to then perform in a manner that is going to yield results and successes. There are a lot of things that the CRA is evaluated based on, especially as of late. We do not have a lot of economic development incentives that we use to attract businesses. We do not necessarily have, you know, all the tools in our toolkit that many CRAs have, and this is based on a limitation in funding. Now, I see here, and I was provided this at the same time that you were provided with this spreadsheet from the CRA treasurer and City of Dania Beach finance director, showing what the 2012 to present allocation of funding from the city has been. It appears to be 11.66 million. If you look at that very last column, the second to last row, if you go a few rows above, combined TIF calculation, it will be that first number in the very last column under total 2012 to present, that the combined TIF calculation of 9.9 million is stated, with a differential or a variance of 1.69 million. So over, excuse me, over the 9-year period, it would appear that the CRA was allocated 1.69 above what the TIF calculation presents based on the spreadsheet provided here. So really what I would like to do is see us get to a place where we can justify what the funding level is. We can make it more performance-based. The more redevelopment and development activity that the CRA is able to foster and encourage, that's going to be indicative of the increase or the stagnation of the incremental value based on taxable values in the original and the expanded area. So what I would like you to discuss today and come to some decision on, if possible, is how we move forward. Because I would not like to have the same situation that we had for fiscal year 2020 and even what began in fiscal year 2019. And those are my comments at this time.
Nikki, can I ask you to come up here, please? Since you just handed this to all of us, I'd like, and although I appreciate Raquel's explanation, can you put this together? Can you please explain to us what it references?
Her quick summary is accurate. What I did just in preparation of the meeting last night, it was take a look at the total contributions that the city has given to the CRA since its inception, and then I also broke it down since 2012. When the ordinance that was passed, it appeared to have been done at the time that the expanded boundaries came into place. So I looked at that piece as well and just did the cumulative total since the ordinance was passed. So cumulatively, the city has contributed 14.138 million against a comparable TIF of city TIF of 13.289 for the entire time the CRA has been in existence. And as she stated, from 2012 forward, it was 11.6 versus 9.9. So the city has basically met its requirement under the ordinance, which does indicate that it's cumulative. That if 1 year isn't met, you would bring it forward to the other year. Having said that, it wasn't until recently that I even knew that ordinance existed. I don't know that the CRA knew it existed, because this is the first time since 2011 that I've seen it brought up from either side. So at least we have met the ordinance, and whether we continue to go down that route will be something that the CRA board and the city commission will make a decision on. In pulling the backup documents for that, I did have Tom take a look at it as well. When I saw that the memo from the previous CRA director did indicate that it was only the city portion, because I wanted to make sure I clarified that before I did the calculations of the TIF that was to be attributed to the CRA.
So does that mean that we've been overfunding every year?
Well, cumulatively, yes. Individual years, some we've funded more than others. There's some years where we didn't have a cost allocation yet because we didn't have a consultant to do that. So in the early years, we didn't have cost allocation. That didn't come in until 2013. Those years we did fund. There's some years where when the economy was poor, where there would have been no funding to the CRA, but we continued to fund it anyway, because obviously we didn't want to stop the progress of the CRA, and we have employees. We're not going to, lay people off, that sort of thing. And then as the economy came back, of course, the values are coming back up in the CRA, so therefore the contribution is, from a numerical standpoint, would increase as well.
Based upon the model that's in that ordinance, has there ever been a year where we did not fund enough according to that ordinance?
The ordinance indicates it would be a cumulative effect, so cumulatively, no. In any individual 1 year, yes.
Okay. Vice Chair.
Nikki, so you don't know, though, because I know you said you just found out about the ordinance as well, as to why it never went into effect.
That I do not know.
No
So
idea?
my guess is based on the backup documents, and I'm guessing because I wasn't involved at the time that it came up, and because it hasn't been brought up since then, I'm thinking it was passed with the intent that when they expanded the CRA boundaries, they were looking for some sort of mechanism for continued funding, and that it was an easy an easy way to just kind of say, oh, hey, look, this is what the values are in the CRA, this is what the TIF would be, let's fund it based on TIF. I don't know that there was any long-term plan to that. I don't know if there was any long-term strategy to understand what that financial impact could mean to the city and the CRA on both sides. When the economy is kind of steady, then, the transfer to the CRA would be steady. Where you're going to find a constant pool is always going to be between city budget and CRA budget. And while I understand the need the CRA has, for funding as well, it's really up to the elected officials to determine how that pool is going to happen. And a good example is going to be whether or not the city can continue to do it on a TIF basis if we keep that ordinance in place. And a good example of that's going to be, for instance, last year and this year. Economy's picking up, things are booming. We're talking about a TIF of 3.1 in FY20 versus the 1.2 million basically that we've allocated, which included a $300,000 increase from last year. If the city were to really contribute $3.1 million this year, that means you're going to have to cut $1.7 million out of your city budget. I don't see that as being something sustainable for the city. So while I agree that there should be some mechanism so they can have whatever funding they feel is necessary and the elected officials feel is necessary to keep supporting the CRA, I don't know that that ordinance was done with the long-term vision of how that may affect the overall city as a budget. So that would be a huge, I think, financial burden for the city to be able to bear. I'm not sure that you could bear that. If somebody can show me where we could cut 1.7 million out of our budget, I'd like to see it, with not affecting, the citizen services and the other things that we're trying to do collectively as a city. So, what other methodology, you might want to come up with is something I think you'll have to discuss amongst yourselves and see what we think would be the best allocation method that would satisfy both city and CRA.
So you don't feel that the TIF methodology is one that the city can bear, that it's not sustainable for us?
In that is something, no, I don't, honestly, not in this particular environment. If the city's going to continue to try to provide the services that they want to provide, if you're going to want to continue to provide your public safety, and you're going to want to continue, to increase some of the services that you have, with increased development comes increased demand. I've said that before. Some of that increased demand is coming on now prior to the development. Your public safety is a huge issue already with increased calls for services at Dania Point for both police and public safety. So there's a good chance that those things are going to be needing to be addressed now prior to all the revenue coming in. And again, the development's coming in, but it's coming in staggered. So from a financial perspective, I think you're going to have a lot of expenses coming in prior to the revenue. It may catch up at some point, but I think the problem with tying it to this ordinance is it's going to restrict your hands as an elected body on both sides to be able to have that flexibility to make the changes you need to make based on what's happening in the environment. And that environment is ever-changing. So I think that's something that you'll have to.
But aren't the other cities in Florida who are able, I'm sorry, can I ask another follow-up? Aren't the other cities in Florida who are able to make it successful, aren't they subject to the same challenges?
Every city is going to be different. Not every city is in the same state of development we are. Not every city, we don't know what their services are that they're providing and what level of service they're providing to their citizens. So I don't think to compare what other cities are doing is necessarily a good fit for Dania Beach. Mm-hmm. Because only you, as elected officials, know what you want to provide to your residents.
Okay, thank you.
Executive Director, you had your light on. I just turned it. Okay. Board Member Brandon Marty.
Yeah. Nikki, I believe in 2011, I believe that was the year, Charlie McElroy. But when this ordinance was passed, a TIF was never even set up. And I think that's why we're at the spot that we're at now. But it was never set up because shortly after that, I believe Bob Baldwin came in, right?
I think he came around 2010.
No, he wasn't here for 2011.
2009
I
or
don't
10.
believe he was
No,
here
I
in
think-
2011.
Yeah, I think
Was
he was
Charlie
no, I
McElroy
think
and
he was-
Ivan Pato.
I think he
He's
was
shown on the minutes.
No, he was 2009. I
He's
think.
shown on the minutes when it was adopted as being present.
Who? Bob
Baldwin.
Okay, yeah, I think he was
It
here.
showed on the minutes?
Yeah.
Well, then really, the TIF then was never set up. How come it was never followed through, Attorney?
That I cannot tell you.
Well, it's not a TIF that you're actually setting up. What we're doing is we're contributing to the CRA based on what they can, the equivalent of the TIF. Why it was not done, I don't know. Again, I wasn't director then, and again, I would argue that I'm not sure it was an issue at the time, probably because at that point in time, the economy was starting
And
to.
we were really down at that time, too.
Right, exactly.
The
So
economy was down.
there wouldn't have been a TIF to contribute a couple of those years because it was actually negative, because the CRA values were negative from the base
And they
year.
didn't figure out how they were going to do it.
Well, no, figuring it out's not the issue, but again, in 2012, right from the get-go, it was already, the values were somewhat negative, so from 2012, 13. And I think it probably just was never approached. I don't know when the previous director left, Mr. Earl, so I don't recall that off the top of my
I
head.
don't either.
But somewhere in there, I think it just got lost. But that's why I wanted to do the cumulative total, because the ordinance does say it's cumulative, to make sure that we at least were in compliance with that, which we have been, so that's great. My recommendation as your CFO on both sides, especially because of, I am leaving, but I'm going to make this recommendation anyway, because I don't think that this is something that might be sustainable for the city, because what this is basically going to do is going to basically state you need to do it this way, and I don't think it's financially sustainable. I think it takes the flexibility out of your hands as the elected officials to decide annually where you think that money should be best suited, whether it be city or CRA. I think you always need to have that flexibility. So, if we had, excess money and, we weren't having conflicting things going on, in both sides of the coin here, then if it was sustainable, I would say, yeah, go for it. But right now, I don't think it is. I think you need to have that flexibility. It really doesn't restrict you as an elected body, because you're still going to make the ultimate decision on how much goes, either way. Whether you want to come up with a new formula or whether you just want to address it on an annual basis. Maybe you want to, set what that base should be, and then, come back. But again, you just have to remember what you do on one side affects the other, and it really could be somewhat problematic. So my recommendation would be to actually rescind the ordinance, and then establish whatever your new criteria would be administratively, which would give you the complete flexibility to do what you need to do.
By rescinding it.
Repealing it. Okay. Board Member James.
Yes. Rescind the ordinance that we never enforced. That's,
Well,
Sounds-
now that it's on the books, you want to
Well-
make sure you address it.
yeah, that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
But I definitely would be in favor of just rescinding an ordinance that we didn't enforce in the beginning. Maybe amending it or coming to some type of an agreement. We are here because of the allocation issue. That's why we're here today. We're here because the allocation has been flat. And we need to come up with some type of a strategy and plan that we don't have to do this every single year. To begin, because this ordinance wasn't enforced, the CRA didn't have a chance to have a reserve account or anything in their reserves, because I believe whatever was left over kind of rolled over to them the next year, right? Correct?
Well, what happens is when the funding is given to the CRA, as an example, if they were given $1 million a year and they created a budget for $1 million a year with, say, 100 in reserves, whatever they don't use, they do roll it forward to the next year and reallocate it to their budget. They don't have to, but that's kind of the methodology they've used, because the city would then, why would we keep contributing, if they're not using what they're already being given? So,
Correct.
That's kind of the methodology that has been used in the past.
Correct. So since
So
they
it
don't
rolls
really,
over.
so since they don't really have a reserve, they don't have a chance to have money in the bank like we do at the city level. In case something goes wrong, you can go to your reserve. So those years that, the city gave allocation more than what would have been in the TIF, the CRA probably would have been able to sustain themselves with the money in their reserves. Now, I hear you saying that we won't be able to sustain it, but there's going to be growth. There is growth outside of the CRA. There is growth. There are projects that are coming on board that are outside of the CRA that will not have any of the percentages taken and given to the CRA in this type of methodology. So there isn't only growth in the CRA. There will be monies that are outside, again, that will be on the tax rolls that, the CRA doesn't get a chance to have a part or take a part in that. And as far as saying what we would, just trying to address all the things that I've been hearing, I would recommend that the CRA took over certain portions, if we followed this ordinance, to provide those certain services to their part of it instead of the city. So you would have that flexibility. So for example, like code enforcement, or having a small allocation that goes towards public safety. I would think should come out of the CRA's budget instead of the city's budget if you then go back and look at this type of an ordinance. So the bulk of all of the services wouldn't come from the city, but to really come from the CRA. The goal of this is to have a CRA that is kind of independent and that can work without coming saying, "Mommy, may I?" to the city, and this is absolutely incentive based. So if the economy goes down, if the development goes down, so does the allocation. The allocation will go down. It's not a stagnant number. It's not a number that is a constant number. I'm sorry, that will be the same every year. It will go directly performance-based, as I've heard up here many times before. If they don't perform, they don't get the money. If you perform, you reward people, and that's what we do with all employees, and I think that's what we should do here. Now, having doing it this year with this current budget that we just passed, obviously I wouldn't be looking to enforce it and take it out of reserves for this year. We know that we've had a very challenging year with our budget, but I think it would be unfair to look at this ordinance that was put here for a reason, but for whatever reason it wasn't enforced, and see what we can do with this type of an allocation or this type of model that we were having. So I want to ask the CRA executive director if that is something that is feasible to take over some of the services that the city currently provides, that the CRA could provide, so that it would cut into some of that from the city.
Florida statutes does allow CRAs to provide services, like you mentioned, code enforcement and even public safety that's focused in the redevelopment area out of CRA funds. And the reason for that is we know that the areas of slum and blight, or the redevelopment area, those areas often need specialized attention because of the code violations and the public safety issues that come with those types of areas. So yes, that's something that is legal, something that is appropriate, and many CRAs do provide that service and that function in the redevelopment area.
So could you also, like, I don't know if this is allowed or not, or permissible, but say if you wanted to say, oh, okay, Officer A and Officer B would be confined to the CRA area to provide service of that. Could you all do that as well and pay that salary from there?
Correct. So let's say under the city's contracts with BSO, or based on the budget allocated for code enforcement, the CRA could say to the city, hey, we want to pay for this service, so whatever the cost of this service is, we want it focused in the CRA, and we will pay for that.
Okay, thank you.
Through the chair, can I comment?
Please.
Okay. I understand and I see where, what you're, possibly presenting. I would have a few comments on that. The first thing I would say is that you really need to look at that logistically, probably, with your public safety, your code enforcement, between your regular boundaries and your expanded boundaries, how that could even logistically happen with the different zones that they have. I don't have, just from my experience, I don't have the numbers, obviously, in hard print. I'm going to tell you that's going to be really expensive. And that probably at this point in time, based on the current allocation, the TIF allocation for the city, I don't think the CRA would be able to absorb those costs. I would be really surprised if they could absorb those costs. And we're talking not just code enforcement, you're talking your police, you're probably talking your fire, you may be talking potentially all city services at that point.
But we weren't talking about all city services.
Well,
we're just saying whichever ones that we could help try and dig into. So, I mean, this isn't about making it work.
But keep in mind, it doesn't change the overall dollar effect, because what happens is if they're absorbing those costs rather than the city, then the money going to them isn't really helping them with the incentives of the economic development that they're looking to do.
It's making them independent, correct? I mean, isn't
It's
that
not,
the goal?
it's not about independence. My understanding is that to move the money that they're seeking to use in the CRA is to promote the economic development and the redevelopment of the CRA. By just taking the cost of a code enforcement officer and shifting it to the CRA isn't going to help. It's actually going to take money away from the money that you're trying to encourage economic development.
Through the chair, if I could just clarify, I think because you mentioned earlier, Nikki, that there's going to be increases to the demand for services based on the redevelopment that is coming. And do you want to shift more money to the CRA when the city will still have that demand for services? Now, if that funding is shifted to the CRA as prescribed in the TIF model, then foreseeably the CRA could take on some of those increases to services that will be demanded based on the additional development.
Correct.
I think that's where the genesis of that discussion came
Yeah,
from.
and I understand that, but it really doesn't solve your situation from a financial perspective as a city as a whole. Because when we levy a millage rate of 5.998 mils, we levy it on the entire city for the entire assessed value of the entire city. Whether we divvy it up between the CRA or we divvy it up between the city, your service demand is still the same. It's just a matter of who's paying for it. So it's really not going to make a difference. You're still going to have that competing interest between what you're trying to provide to the city as a whole versus, the differences between the two entities. So it's really not going to resolve the situation you're trying to.
Correct. Just to be on record, I wasn't trying to just resolve just that situation.
Right.
This is one of many things, or one of many benefits that could happen. I really would like to workshop this with my colleagues so we can see what direction we want to go in, and then you can help us figure out how to get there instead of, it just seems like it's why this can't work versus this is what it is and this is how to make it work. So I would want to see how to make it work first before we are up here trying to see why it can't work.
Board Member Harris.
Well, I think what we should do is repeal the ordinance that we just found that we didn't know that we have, and come up with a better formula and a new ordinance, because the information, which doesn't have any of our names on it from 10 years ago, isn't really pertinent to the situation today. It was more pertinent to the situation back in 2010. And if we can come up with a better formula and a better ordinance by repealing this one, and then have a workshop to develop a new one with maybe even before you leave, with your help, today? Well,
we'll discuss it after.
yeah, well, we'll work it out.
We'll figure it out.
Maybe you can be a
a way.
consultant, but, it doesn't have my name on it, doesn't have your name on it, doesn't have Lauren's name on it,
That's
doesn't have
true.
Lori's name on it.
It was developed prior
I mean,
to
where
the
did it come
entire
from all of a
commission.
sudden? Did somebody pull it out of their hat or out of their,
Yeah, I'm not even sure how it
yeah,
came
how did it
about.
just surface? I don't know, and nobody knew about it, but, Chicky, were you on the commission then, in 2010?
I missed
I
it
don't
by
think
one
so.
year. Bobby was.
But, I mean, I'm all about repealing it and coming up with a better formula for like today's dollars in the development, because nobody foresaw that development 10 years ago.
And honestly,
'Cause we didn't have it.
I think ordinances right, you're exactly
have it.
right.
It wasn't
And
even thought of.
Ordinances in general, even all ordinances, when they're put in place, are put in place at what makes sense at the time. That doesn't mean that you can't go back and revisit, what's happening in today's world versus what was happening 10 years ago.
Come up with a better one.
Vice Chair.
So I appreciate what you're saying, Board Member Harris, but I definitely would not be in favor of repealing this ordinance. It's important to me that, one, we remember why we're here today, what happened at that workshop, what a nightmare that was, and that what we have in front of us is a solution. Now, I think we need to agree upon the details of how we get to that solution. And if we need to have another I thought that's what we were going to do today, but if we need to have another workshop to do so, whatever. But I would suggest that, we do not repeal that ordinance, that we amend that ordinance as needed to make it, I don't know it inside and out. I glanced at it. So I don't know what portions to even suggest need amendment. But to work from there, to repeal it, I think that's counterintuitive to what we're trying to do today.
You could do a hybrid of something if you're not looking to repeal it. My suggestion would be, if you're going to amend it to remove the TIF component, but amend it keep the budget to covenant, and then decide on what that amount should be, or what calculation or what formula you would use to do that.
My turn. Couple of things. First of all, these cities that have the TIFs, they're getting money from the county. They're getting a county match as well, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so in such a situation, if there's a county match,
Well, we're talking true CRAs, not.
right,
Yeah.
right, like what the norm is.
It's not characterized as a match, but it's a county TIF, and then there's a city
Whatever.
TIF.
Right.
It's basically money coming in from the county. So there is additional money that's coming in from the county. It's not fully supported by the individual cities, right? This is not that situation.
Right.
Okay. I have a serious concern about having a separate code enforcement, separate police enforcement, separate public safety in a particular neighborhood. To me, that just creates division in the city. And it's like setting up two separate cities. That is not what we are trying to do here. But that's what it feels like to me. That's very concerning to me. The services, city services are involved with public safety. CRAs traditionally are not set up with the focus of dealing with code enforcement, public safety, and all of that. Traditionally, they are set up for economic development. And I think what our problem is we've gotten away from that focus of economic development in the CRA. The new businesses that are coming in are not new businesses that were generated by the CRA. They are businesses that came here either through other entities, through the development environment at the time, or what have you. What we really need to focus on is getting back into what the CRA was initially created for in this city, and that was to create more economic development in the main part of town. And so that being the case, I mean, I know there was a time in the past administrations where there were a lot of services, a lot of projects that were moved over to the CRA. Whether that was a product of the prior administration not being interested in doing some of those things, I don't know. But there was definitely a movement to move more things into the CRA at that point. But some of those things impact the entire city. They aren't just for the particular neighborhood. So my concern again goes back to general funds going into a particular area where it's benefiting a particular area. So I don't want to divide. I feel like that's what we're heading down that road. And I think it might be best if we take a step back, go back to focusing on economic development, go back to focusing on housing. Those are the two things that were really the priorities of the CRA, and see if we can get those to a point where it is maybe more beneficial at some point in time where we can actually put in more funds to the CRA. I think that's our biggest issue. Another problem that we've had is that this budget, for example, wasn't presented to us until about a week before we were supposed to approve it. It would have been more beneficial, like the city, we get the budget like a month in advance, a month and a half in advance. If we have it more in advance, we can discuss some of the issues in a little more detail as opposed to rushing through them. But it's just, I really think that we've lost some focus here, and I feel like we're spending more time on decorative things and doing things that are less important while we don't have all the monies coming in yet from the new businesses that are coming into the entire city and that are benefiting the entire city. So if we can maybe just take a step back and refocus, and then we can always come back at a later time and see where we are when that money is really coming in, when all the new buildings are built and the residents are in there and we see the tax dollars coming in. It might be a more beneficial time to look into doing this. But in the meantime, I really do think that there are certain things that if they were not strictly under the CRA, that they might be able to be handled by the city, and perhaps in a more efficient way, in a more economic way. The concern is, and this happens in a lot of cities, you get a CRA, and no fault to anyone in particular, but it's just, sometimes the CRAs end up being an area where a city starts putting in their more expensive projects, or their more unnecessary projects. And they put them into a CRA and they use the funds there, just assuming there's going to be an unlimited amount of money that's going to be coming into it. The city can't do that because the city is having to address public safety and other services and that sort of thing, and core services that need to be supported. So, I think we need to just take a step back and look at it and just see, because a lot of these things would be really nice to have. A lot of the things that we've thrown out there, different ideas that everybody's had, would be really nice to have, but we're just not quite there yet. And the money isn't coming in yet. So until it comes in, it just makes more sense, I think, to just take a step back and then we address it as we're going along. Let me see. Board Member James.
Yes. Executive Director, what are the priorities and the mission of the CRA? Could you please give us a refresher?
So based on the adopted 2009 CRA plan, and then the updated plan that was adopted and approved in 2015, we have 5 overarching redevelopment goals, and it's to improve our sub-areas. The CRA is defined by certain neighborhoods. It's also to provide for affordable housing. It's to provide an active marketing strategy. It's to redevelop the CRA in a sustainable and efficient manner. One of the things that I want to address, if I may, Board Member James, everything that the CRA does is with the intent to increase economic development. Going back several years, even the work that the CRA did to update the code and update our zoning has enabled the city to increase development. The CRA was very instrumental in that process. So a lot of the things that are coming on today were made accessible because of the work that the CRA has done, including promoting and working with the developers of Dania Point for that project to become a reality. This budget was provided to the CRA board 3 weeks before the meeting scheduled to adopt. At several points between that 3-week period, some board members reached out to have discussions about the budget and ask for any clarity that was necessary, and some board members did not. I was ready and willing to provide any necessary information to talk about the budget and what it entailed. So Chapter 163, Part 3 of Florida statutes, it really gives the CRA the opportunity to work on several different projects. And that's further defined in the CRA plan. And that's one of the reasons why I encourage you all to go to the Florida Redevelopment Academy courses, because it really does explain what the scope of the CRA is and what the CRA is legally able to do, and how the CRA plan is instrumental in defining what the projects of the CRA are. So I would agree that if there is consensus to amend the ordinance rather than rescind or repeal, I would be in favor of that. But I think absent of a TIF, and that can be more clearly defined by the board, absent of that, I think every year we're going to be looking at how do we get to the point where we define what the allocation is. And so I think it behooves the board for us to move forward in a way that we can be fiscally responsible and plan for the future appropriately. We can start to do things that align us with what is best practices for a CRA. And I do want to make sure that we keep in mind that anything that the CRA puts forward is going to be in line with Florida statutes, Chapter 163, Part 3, and in line with the CRA plan. So I would love to see us get to the place where we come to a consensus on what the funding level should be and make it formula-based, because I think that's the easiest way also for you to justify to the residents what the funding for the CRA should be. I'm not sure why this ordinance was not put into effect in 2011. What I am here to do is not reinvent the ordinance, but if we need to make it better, I think that's something that we need to clearly do for us to move forward, so that we're not having the back and forth that occurred a couple of weeks ago. I would not like to see us move forward in that fashion year after year.
Thank you. And for clarification, when it comes down to like city TIF versus county TIFs, the city's allocations to TIFs in other cities, is it greater than the TIFs of the amount of the county?
Correct. What I've seen as the trend, as I reviewed some of the budgets for CRAs in the area, I saw that their city TIF revenue was higher than their county TIF revenue. And I found that to be very interesting. So although we don't have the financial support of the county, most CRAs do not look at the county's contribution as their primary source of revenue, but rather the city's contribution.
And when we were talking about, and I heard a comment that said the services being completely separate, it wasn't to my understanding that you would be hiring separate people than who already works for the city, or would it be an allocation of your funds that would go towards those employees?
Correct. It would not be the CRA having a code enforcement department or anything like that. It would be the CRA contributing the funding to ensure that a specific code enforcement officer or officers service the CRA district or the redevelopment area.
For that amount of time, or for the entire salary? So
it could be a portion
right,
of the salary. So let's say that code enforcement officer worked 50% of the time in the CRA and 50% of the time outside the CRA. That 50% would come from, or could come from, the CRA's revenue. So it wouldn't have to be 100%. It could be a portion that could be split by the city and by the CRA. So no, it's not something where we would have to hire and create our own department to provide such services whatsoever. It doesn't have to be that way. And that would be at the discretion of the board, and something that the board could discuss and determine at a future time if that's desirable.
Okay, lastly, before Vice Chair breaks her finger over there, I would like to see what the board even felt about maybe staggering the amounts to get to a consistent amount of funding that will come from the city as the allocation of the TIF. So as of now, if the city couldn't sustain 100% of the TIF if we wanted to start maybe at like a 75% range of the first year for our next budget year to allocate, and then we can decide a formula like 75, 85, 100, or something like that to get to a place to where we are upholding the ordinance. If that's the amendment that I would suggest. Thank you.
Before you go, just to respond to that, my concern, though, is that it sounds almost like you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. And it's still going to be money that's coming out from the city to pay for the services that you would then be paying from the CRA. So it'd still be funding coming from the city to go to the CRA. So again, you're still talking about a significant a portion of money coming out of the city where they potentially could have to cut core services. That's a concern. Vice Chair.
Thank you. So the services thing doesn't make any sense to me at this point. Could we still, Director Williams, could we decide on, I 100%, believe that at some level coming into this, whatever percentage it is the way out of the chaos from the last budget session. And I think if we can establish a percentage of the TIF, that would be a big step forward. I'm not, the services thing doesn't make sense to me yet. But is that, so could that be a separate thing? Can we try and find a place where we feel comfortable coming in?
Absolutely.
Okay, because I mean, I see you have the spreadsheet here, and there's all different ways at which we could enter into this to build up to get into it. So I know that Commissioner James said 75%, but looks like we have other options other than 75%. Right now, what are we at? Like, what's the number?
Okay, so based on the projections for next year, for fiscal year 2021, our current annual funding allocation of general fund is about 50% of the TIF.
Okay, so so right now we're at 50%. So, and she talked about going to 75%. Okay, and that puts us, the way you have it staggered, what would that put us at, and how long to get to 100%?
Okay, so, just roughly, based on 2021's projections, again, this would mean that you would keep the same millage rate and...
assuming, the millage rate stayed the same?
Right. Assuming that, whatever we think is going to be coming online next year actually does come online. The 75% of next year's projected TIF would be 2.1 million. So we're at 1.4 million now. So it would be going from 1.4 to 2.1. So about 700,000.
Okay, and so just for giggle's sake, so I'm looking at this, and so it would make no sense to go to 55%. That doesn't really move the needle at all. It doesn't accomplish the goal to get us out of the situation that we're in.
Correct. We know that personnel costs are also going to rise next year, and we know the struggle it was to remove certain line items that we had this year. So, looking at a 5% increase on the current annual funding, I don't know if that's a sustainable strategy for even 1 year, much less a long-term strategy for future years.
When I look at 65 and 70%, so that would be a decrease of 200, can you do the math for me real quick of the difference between if we went from the 75 to the 65 of what that would be in the staggered contributions for the first year for 2021?
My mic was off. For the first year, if we're looking at a projection of 2.8, let's see, 65% of the TIF would be 1.8 million, which would be about 400,000 more than the current actual contribution for fiscal year 2020.
Okay. All right. So is there any other percentage anyone is comfortable in discussing? I was looking more towards the 65 and 70. I think that still gets the CRA out of the situation they were in. I was looking at what's the lowest one that accomplishes the goal. So it seemed like 55 doesn't do anything. That would be pointless. So I was trying to see what's the first meaningful one we could go into, and those were the first two, those were the two lowest ones that were a meaningful jump. So I was seeing if anyone else had feelings on what their entry point was.
I'm okay with the 70 if you make.
With the 70%?
Yeah.
Hold up. Lights, we need lights. But we're not just going to just have a free-for-all here. I'd like to know what Nikki has to say about it as far as the financial impact, because that's the bigger concern here, because we don't want to end up in a situation where we are taking so much money away from the city that we're cutting core services in order to support a CRA. Because if you're going to look at which is more important, I think we can all agree that public safety is a lot more important. So that being the case, I'd like to know what the impact would be for any percentage. And I don't really know that we don't necessarily have to make this decision today. This is a workshop to discuss these things. We have time to make this decision, and I would really like to see an analysis done financially. I know you're leaving, but I would like to see a financial analysis done to see what the impact would be, what sort of things would have to be cut in order to accommodate these additional funding requests from the CRA. I mean, you can't, we're not going to bankrupt the city or cut out core services for our residents in order to support the CRA. We can't do that. I don't even think it'd be legal. So that being the case, I think we need to seriously look at this, get a better analysis of it, get a better breakdown on it before even getting into any of that percentages and everything else.
Well, I don't think that was the intention, Chair.
I don't think it was the intention.
I was just suggesting that if this was the model that we were going to go with, and as was passed in the ordinance, where there's a lot of information here before us of different places to enter in through and where people would feel comfortable. That is the purpose of the workshop. I would say again what I said at the budget hearing. Part of this is how you value the CRA. If we're going to give nothing and just leave it as it is, then there should be no more discussions about the projects that we're going to bring forward, because it's meaningless. We're setting the director and ourselves as a board up for failure. Yes, thank you. Because it's not giving the board the resources they need to make these projects come forward, to do the things in economic development, to do all that. So I think it would be, I don't know the exact word that I'm looking for, but it would be pointless if we didn't come to some decision. And perhaps it won't be today if we need some, further financial discussions about it or another workshop. But I do think we need to pursue this to the end, because otherwise we will be back in that chaotic room, in that chaotic situation where everyone ends up losing, everyone ends up disappointed.
And I would agree with you on that. I just think that the spreadsheet we just got, the ordinance just was discovered and being brought up. I think we said in the beginning of this whole discussion with the ordinance that if you were following it and it's on a continuing amount, that actually we've overfunded the CRA. So following in that grain, there isn't necessarily a lot more money that would need to be put in there. It's the future that's the concern, and how much more is going to need to be put in, and having to cut from the city in order to, again, steal from Peter to pay Paul. That's the problem, and that's the concern. That's my concern. That's not something that, I don't think, it's talking about putting our names on something. I wouldn't want to be putting our names on something where we have to either increase our millage rate, increase our taxes, do something like that in order to sustain this, because that's where it looks like we're headed, if this is what we're going to talk about doing. Plus, we haven't talked about any other ways that there might be in order to bring the CRA's budget on an ongoing basis into a better place, so that we don't necessarily need to add additional funding. There's an assumption being made here that additional funding is absolutely needed, and I don't know that it necessarily is, because we haven't discussed any ways that we might be able to cut some things in order to make it more sustaining. Board Member Harris.
I'm going to say this one more time. I think we should repeal the ordinance, come up with a better one that's more suitable in 2020, that will work for us better, because like a lot of the projects that are currently in the CRA, which is like Dania Point, that landed in your lap. You didn't go out and solicit Dania Point or those developers or all those stores. Jeremy didn't either. That was a Kimco project. They mixed that mix of stores with their other 650 shopping centers across the country. Is that true or false, Raquel?
So one of the first things I did when I joined the CRA is go back and look at meeting minutes, agendas, going back several years in the CRA. And one thing that I did discover is that Mr. Earl, the originating CRA executive director, he brought forward several items regarding the Dania Point project to the CRA board. When I first joined the city, one of my first meetings was with Mr. Bob Shapiro, and he did relay to me the involvement of the CRA in Dania Point. And so when I do talk about what the contributions of the CRA has been in the past, it is not based on hearsay from the general public. It is from records that I have found, official records captured by the city clerk or the CRA clerk, and discussions of the people directly involved with the Dania Point project. Now, as with anyone who joins...
that's a good enough answer. Let me ask another question.
As with...
The next question is Project Magic. Project Magic. That was developed by an investment group in Chicago more than 5 years ago. It landed in our laps. Is that correct? What I want to see is some projects on Federal Highway. Federal Highway, as Chicky said a few years ago, just looks like it just needs a shot in the arm or a coat of paint. Put a paint on it. I think that's where our focus needs to be, because it looks the same to me as it has for the last 5 years. 115 years. I mean, that's what our focus needs to be. We need a workshop to come up with some better projects, because we can't hang our hat on Dania Point and Project Magic, because we're not responsible for them. We need better projects here in the city center core and along Federal Highway from Griffin Road to Sterling Road. That's what we need. That's what I think the CRA should be doing.
Absolutely.
Economic manager, is DeAndre out there visiting businesses and seeing what the target scale is? He's never been to my business before, I could tell you that. So let's come up with a project list and some performance-rated items. So, and see, and as far as the housing goes, which is great, the houses are great. But, it took, here we are, almost, the end of September. We had a kickoff in April, and they're just now digging the holes. I talked to Joe, and he said he couldn't get any money out of the finance people. He's had to foot the bill himself to start the concrete and the rebar and the wood for the roofs. So, I mean, come on. So where are the projects?
So through the chair, I will say that the CRA has invested quite a bit of resources into our
invested also.
Board member.
Hold on. Stop. Board member, let her finish, and then you can reply. Thank you.
So any attempt to discredit the work that the CRA has done can be easily countered with the level of investment that the CRA has had in our city center area. Our commercial property improvement grants, we have devoted almost $700,000 to businesses for facade improvements, most of which have occurred on Federal Highway. I mean, the grant is now specific to just Federal Highway and some parts of East Dania Beach Boulevard. The City Center project that we are embarking on, the CRA has invested about $75,000 in the past year to get us to where we are right now. Anything that quote unquote fell in our lap, I would say that the CRA has been over the years working to get to this point. As with anyone who joins a company or an organization, there's going to be things that have happened before. As with any elected official that joins the city, anything that happened before, you either take it and you run with it and try to expand on that, or I don't know that anyone would sit and say that, something fell in our lap and therefore, the CRA as it is today is not performing or doing anything. I would say that our efforts, even with our affordable housing project, the timeline for the project has been established based on the developers agreement and the amendment to the developers agreement, as the board has, I think, unanimously agreed to that development schedule. So the development is way ahead of schedule. So any projection that or assertion that the CRA is not doing what we're supposed to do or not doing it in a timely fashion in regards to the housing program, I think that's disconcerting. So the CRA has done a lot towards economic development, and any notion that we have not been using our funding towards those ends, I think that does a disservice to the CRA to put that out there.
The developer of Kimco told me that they put in over $1 million in infrastructure cost. Did the CRA contribute any of those funds?
I think why we're having this discussion today is to talk about how we get the CRA to have funds to do economic development
But
incentives.
as it exists today, there are no funds. I mean, we didn't contribute any funds to that. That was over $1 million in improvements.
Okay.
Well, the point is that the CR is doing all of this, but I want to see more here. I mean, Federal Highway, I mean, you know what? We need to, targeted businesses and other things out there, like targeted scale businesses. What about the Winn-Dixie Shopping Center? It looks worse than it did 5 years ago. What are we doing over there? Is there any business attraction over there? You talked about East Dania Beach Boulevard. What about that?
I would, through the chair, I would recommend that we focus this discussion on funding and how we're going to look at the CRA's budget. I appreciate any commentary or criticism that may come in our direction based on economic development or business attraction and retention, but I think we're kind of getting away a little bit from the main discussion as it is on the agenda. And so if we could potentially get back to that, I think that would be more appropriate.
And I would agree, but at the same time, I do think Board Member Harris has a point in that you're asking to have more funding. We're trying to figure out a way to fund the CRA properly. But the problem is trying to see, number one, when additional funding is going to be coming in, additional revenue is going to be coming in, and you can't really predict that. We've tried to predict it. It's been predicted for years now, and it still hasn't come out exactly where it's supposed to be. The other issue is that if we're not seeing, again, I'm going back to the focus that we're talking about with economic development, that's on your list of things that are part of the mission statement, is economic development. And if we're not seeing that, I asked you for that project list a long time ago as far as any new businesses that were coming in, and you gave it to me. And again, there was maybe a handful of businesses that were talked to and things were discussed with them, but nothing came of it. So as far as Dania Point is concerned, I think you're giving too much credit to Mr. Earl. He may have been involved in the discussions, but I think if you went today and asked and spoke to the developers of Dania Point, they would tell you something completely different, because I've actually had this conversation not too long ago about who was actually responsible for bringing that in here, and that was not the answer. A lot of people want to take credit for it. But the bottom line is that it was something, it was the development climate at the time. A lot of things that have occurred in this city with development have to do with the climate at the time and the fact that the city has a lot of opportunities for development, whether there's a CRA or not. So although I agree that we need to get back on the focus, I do think that the Board Member Harris's points are well taken simply because of the fact that, you need to be able to show, this can't be a one-way street. It can't just be a matter of the city is just going to put funding in. Something has to be done in return in order to show that the focus is being addressed. And if there have been a handful of businesses that have been approached and a handful of businesses that have not been successful in coming here for one reason or another, then we need to expand that. That really needs to be the focus. It needs to be, if you're going to increase the revenue coming into the city, you're going to increase it by bringing in new businesses, not just new residents, but new businesses. So I understand that. Let me go on to the next person here. Board Member Brandon Marty.
I think that it sounds like, gee, you're doing too much on the west side of Federal Highway and nothing on the east side. And guess what? I didn't even know that Winn-Dixie was in the CRA. I really didn't know that. So that brought light to me. Thank you, Bill. Even though it goes back to the same thing. If we don't give her the money to work with, how could we expect miracles to be performed? Who said touche? Well, it's true.
Please
if
refrain.
We don't help.
Miss Grace. Miss Grace, do we need to ask you to leave?
No, you're not asking her to leave.
We don't need participation.
Thank you for your French lesson. I appreciate it very much, and touche. I just think that Bill had great points on an area that's the gateway to the beach, and even Dania Beach Boulevard looks like a junkyard, I'm sorry to say. But in town, it's always been there that way since forever. And you're still going to hear it when you go out there and run for office. They're going to say, y'all promised to do something, but you don't do nothing with Federal Highway. It's a cemetery. Yeah, that's maybe where we should go. Put a plaque there. But if you don't give her money to work with, how is she supposed to get anything done? We have to support the CRA no matter what. And I think that Vice Mayor, the numbers that she came up with was fine. Now, I want to address to you. Nikki, everything when you come up here sounds negative to me. Can you find something positive to help us accomplish some way to get some money into the CRA? You know what I mean? I know you find ways to do so many things, and I have faith in that. But can you think of something? Otherwise, I need Anna up here.
It's not a matter of finding a way to put money into the CRA, it's finding the best way and the most flexible way to put money into the CRA.
What's the best way?
So again, I'm gonna recommend that you keep whatever ordinance you decide to do, whether it's a new ordinance, an amended ordinance, or no ordinance at all, that you keep it flexible so you always have the flexibility to make those decisions, whatever formula you choose. What I caution is to be very careful about using projected assessed values. We've been in that situation the last several years. This year, who would have thought 4.4%? We got $850,000 total for the entire city. Right. Total. That's $850,000 to do something with. And we know that that's automatically consumed. So if we commit ourselves to a percentage of a projected value, you may be losing that entire $850 plus. So I encourage you to keep that flexibility.
I don't mind flexibility, but
okay.
I'm not going to take the power away from the director of the CRA. The Florida law says they are to remain separate.
And that's okay. They can remain.
They must.
Remaining separate has nothing to do with how you decide to fund them as elected officials.
Well, because we're their board.
Exactly. Well, and you're the board for both.
Right.
So you have a bigger picture to look at than just city or CRA. You have to look at them in a combined totality. So having that flexibility is really important because things could shift overnight.
But I still want them separate.
Yep,
no
separate.
matter what.
The
That's
other
it.
thing, and again, this year was a great example of that. The other thing is that I have to keep encouraging you, whatever you do decide to do, remember it is not coming out of reserves. It
No.
needs to come out of operational expenses, which means one budget affects the other. I agree that an analysis definitely would need to be done before you make any final decisions on a funding mechanism, because whatever you decide, you're going to have to go back and now look at the general fund budget and say, well, where could we possibly get that kind of money? What kind of, services will we be looking at changing? Would we look at changing services? Is it even possible? It's easy to say, oh, let's take $500,000 from one and give it to another, but when logistically you go in and start looking at your budget and you come down to the point of where is it really going to come from on a long-term basis, it could be, again, your public safety is close to 58% of your general
I saw it on
fund
the
budget.
pie.
The rest of your pie
Yeah.
for other services is pretty small. So honestly, the biggest place you're going to get, and the first place you're probably going to be able to get that kind of money is public safety, which we know people aren't going to want to cut. So ideally, where you're going to go, you're going to start looking at the smaller divisions. Whether it's landscaping or streets or wherever it might be, it's going to be a difficult choice for you to make as elected officials.
We need another year, don't we?
So that's the other thing. And then the third thing I'm just going to say is if the board decides and the commission that they are going to increase the contribution to the CRA, something was brought up earlier, which was discussed as if we decided to do a TIF or whatever contribution we're going to do, whether or not the CRA would then absorb part of the cost for police and code and things like that. I would advocate that if you are going to increase that you do look at doing that then, because currently the cost allocation that we have only includes basically administrative cost overhead, which would be basically you as the elected officials, the time spent from legal, the time spent from HR, the time spent from finance processing invoices and whatever services that we provide. So it's just your core services and city clerk. We don't put into the cost allocation currently for the CRA, for police, for code, for any of those things. So if we're going to increase the the actual contribution, then I would advocate that you really take a look at the entire CRA and look at what cost allocations you would put towards the CRA. Because obviously we're already providing those services. We're providing code, we're providing public safety, citywide. We're providing all citywide services in the CRA, but we don't recoup that cost right now. Because up until now, it's always been more about administrative and economic development and not actually running those services. So we don't include
I have
those.
to add to that, because that's not how the statute dictates or reads. It's not that if the city is providing code enforcement services in the CRA district, that the CRA is responsible to pay for those funds. It's that the CRA can augment or add to the code enforcement or specify that code enforcement services be specific to the redevelopment area, but with funding from the CRA. So it's not that, okay,
So-
the city has police in the CRA district, so the CRA must be paying for those police. That's not how the
Okay,
statute reads.
so then we're going back to the actual practicality of whether we could implement something like that, meaning that we would have separate zones for the CRA, separate code enforcement just for the CRA. And then that you would need to look at administratively as how that would function, because now you have your employees in the city designated to certain areas. So how would that affect how they currently do their job, and are they able to do the entire city if we're only putting them in certain areas? So
And it's not that
it's
they
an
would be
administration
limited
area.
to the redevelopment area, but any funds that the CRA would contribute toward the cost for that officer or that employee would come from the CRA. So that enforcement officer could work anywhere in the city, but the portion of time devoted to the redevelopment area, the CRA could contribute funds toward that.
But you would have to,
But-
you would have to
but-
have some kind of methodology for that. You'd have to figure out, how do you determine that, this officer's working only here in the CRA 3 hours a day versus, the other 5 outside of the CRA?
And wouldn't that, I'm sorry to
It's an
interrupt, but wouldn't that
administrative
just-
burden.
Yeah, but wouldn't that also just increase the cost overall?
Yes. Well, it's good. Well, it wouldn't
cops.
increase the, it wouldn't necessarily increase the cost. Right now, your code enforcement and your police are going where they're needed. They're
Right.
not necessarily going CRA, and they're not necessarily going
It would just
city.
be the money going into the CRA and paying it out of the CRA?
Yeah, it's
But
just
so
a
we'd still-
pass-through.
Okay, so we'd still be funding it, though.
Yeah.
It's still coming from the city. Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
Nikki, I've always been for putting an officer in the CRA area specifically for the CRA, because they are the areas that they are needed the most. And in fact, a few meetings ago, I brought up the fact that I would like to see us be able to put, at that time, 2 officers specifically for the CRA area. Most calls are there, and they need it. And that's what I wanted to really do, if you recall.
I think this would require deep conversations with both
Sure.
code enforcement and public safety to see
But it
if,
makes
how they would,
sense.
because they know where the calls are, they know exactly administratively how and if they could even implement what we're asking them to, because now we're asking them to really basically, itemize and, exactly where their services are being provided on a regular basis. And while they do have call logs and things like that,
I'm gonna ask
you may find out that there's more than you would anticipate, but again, they're about first response. They're going to go where they're needed, when it comes to public safety. So that's all I have.
Board Member James.
Yes. I don't need anything, thank you. As far as allocations, I know that we already do allocations, so the city, putting people back into the cities for the city to pay for it, as we just heard, and as I already knew, the CRA already pays an allocation amount for administrative things. They just don't pay an allocation for other things that we could possibly add. As far as like what's going on in the city and what's going on Federal Highway and Dania Beach Boulevard and all these things, I can guarantee Board Member Harris probably hasn't taken a walk with the CRA, if I could guess, a CRA executive director down here to have these concerns, or have meetings behind closed doors to have these concerns, because you have very.
Stop.
I will,
Stop.
and I can, because you refuse to meet with her, but you want to put her on blast
Can we not?
there. And so
Can we just
it's my-
stop? One at a
this is
time.
this is my turn to talk, and thank you. I appreciate that. All right, somebody give Bill a hug. No. And so, as I'm saying, if there are issues that we are all having, I have a lot of issues and conversations with different individuals outside of this meeting, and that's not just with Raquel. I have conversations with our city manager. I have conversations with our lobbyists. I have conversations with Tom Ansborough. So regardless of what people may think that me and Raquel have a good relationship, that's fine. I want to have good relationships with the people who are our employees. I mean, I think that is most suitable. And instead of coming up here and yelling and screaming and haven't done your job to even go and meet with them outside of this. Now, we're talking about, I heard we were talking about like monies that may be absorbed all because we would have to pay it all with that allocation. We have to really remember that there are projects that are outside of the CRA. I just met with a project that's happening outside of the CRA. We have a lot of different developments. We have the St. Maurice. We have Larry Baum. We have the one on the 40th, 44th. You have a lot of the FP&L. You have a lot of the ones on State Road 84. So there are a lot of other projects that are happening outside of the CRA that would not go to the CRA. And so to say that whatever the values are from these other projects would be absorbed, that's not a totally true statement. I would like to get back to what we were supposed, like trying to come to a decision, so we don't be here for 5 hours.
And I don't think we're allotted 5 hours today, so I think
Okay,
all of us have things to
that's
do.
an exaggeration, but what I'm saying is we tend to be here for a long time and never come up with a consensus or a way to go. And so to answer the vice chair's question that she asked, I am okay with the 70 to answer that question. And I'm definitely not in favor of putting money back from the CRA back into the city, or to say what other projects, because we sat here for 45 minutes to talk about a party.
We've
About
already
what
resolved
was
that. We've
important
already
and what
resolved that
wasn't
issue.
important. That's what we sat and did. So when we talk about like, oh, decorative things or what's important, we sat here for 45 minutes and spoke about a party. And so when we're talking about what's important, let's talk about giving the resources to the economic development, giving the resources to the small businesses, giving the resources to affordable home ownership and affordable opportunities here in our CRA, giving the resources so that we can go and attract these businesses. I mean, we're talking about Federal Highway, but everyone on here has approved one or not more of the many hotels that are coming on Federal Highway, and we're a part of that. And on Federal Highway, so there is activity going on in Federal Highway. There's a lot of conversation going on in Federal Highway. There's a lot of conversation going everywhere else, but we really need to stick to the focus that is providing the resources to our CRA that we are a part of. We are the CRA and we are the city. So absolutely one budget affects the other. But when we're talking about just one budget, what we did with the CRA's budget, I would like to see us do with the city's budget. I would like to see us go line item by line item like we did with the
You
CRA's
did.
budget. No, we did not.
You did. In a workshop, we did, yes.
We did not go line item by line item because I started and we sat there again for an extended period of time and spoke about charitable organizations. That's what we did at the city's workshop. And I went and met separately with the city manager. We did not go line item by line item. So if we did go line item by line item, I can call out some things that you probably couldn't even answer. But that's not the time or the place for that. But what I'm saying is, if we, because we are in charge of both the CRA's budget and the city's budget, go line item by line item, or we really examine both budgets, I think that we can come up with something that will work for the city and the CRA. I'm not trying to bankrupt the city that I sit on the board and I'm a commissioner on, and I'm not trying to have a failing CRA that I am a board member on. I want to be able to do both, and we can do both. So to answer your question, Vice Mayor, I am okay with starting at the 70% mark. Thank you.
I'm going to ask that we get an analysis of a financial impact of any amounts, whether it's 60%, 70%, 100%. We need to have an analysis of the financial impact to the city. That was what we just discussed. That's what actually Nikki recommended as well, that she agreed that we needed to do some sort of an analysis because we need to know where that money would come from. We can't just blanketly say 70% and take that out of the city's budget and put it into the CRA budget. I also think that if we do that financial analysis, then we can go back and look at this ordinance and see if it is really something that needs to be there or if it needs to be tweaked, because I think that was also on the table. It was discussed previously. Is that something that we need to look at, either revise it, repeal it, something, because the way that it's working, as we were told financially, the city cannot sustain it as is. So that's something that I think we need to look at, as opposed to just blanketly putting out money at this point. And we have time to do this. It doesn't have to be done today. Vice Chair.
I don't have a problem with that. I would like to then make a date for when we could go over that information, that prepared information of what would be the impact at 65, 70, and 75%. Maybe this was just a little bit too much to tackle in one workshop. So let's focus on where we are. We agree that this is possibly a way we want to enter into to finance the CRA activities. So let's just focus it a little bit more so that everyone feels they're making an informed decision versus having all these questions and making a phone call here and doubts. And then as far as the ordinance goes, since there's some questions about the ordinance, again, I don't think we should repeal it, but let's have us all take a look at it and see if Nikki can still do this, or if this is going to be by the new person. I don't know what hour you're leaving, to have the recommendations for how the ordinance should be amended. And then at that meeting, we can make the decision, at that workshop, we can make the decision at which point to enter in, if we were going to enter in at one of those percentage points. I would hope that at that point, with that abundance of information, we could do that.
I
Yes.
need to make a request of the board, and maybe this can be added to your, I don't know if this is a motion right now.
It's not a motion, it's a workshop.
So I would like that any financial analysis be reviewed independently. Anything provided by the finance director, that the CRA, A, have an opportunity to review before it's presented, and B, I don't know if we need to consider the city auditor or whomever to also be able to take a look to see, because I don't want it said that Nikki's coming up or whoever's coming up and is being negative. I don't want that to be the statement. So I would like for the CRA to be provided with any documentation that is going to be produced prior to any meeting, and have an opportunity to analyze, and perhaps have someone independent to take a look at that analysis as well. I don't have full access to the city's budget to see what the impact to services would be, or what the current level of funding for certain things are. So I don't want it said that the information that is being provided is positive or negative or leaning one way or another. I would like to be able to review and perhaps seek additional information from.
First of all, there's a new person coming in, and my guess is that person is going to be doing this analysis, because my guess is that Nikki has other things that she has to finish up today before she leaves. I don't think any of us here knows this new person that's coming in, so I'm not really sure how getting two opinions for the same thing from, even though you have one person who is responsible for looking at these things for the entire, whatever you want to do. I don't care.
Okay, so that's fine if the CRA wants to receive the information beforehand, so that you can review it, and if at that time you feel that you want an independent review, then we can do that as well. Look, the goal is to move this forward. I'm not looking to drag this on where every 3 weeks from now we have a workshop, then table again 3 weeks and we have another workshop. I'm looking to make a decision. But I understand it's not a decision to be made in haste when there's still some questions out there. And just because I'm comfortable with something, it's important to me that my colleagues are comfortable with it as well, and feel that we're moving forward in the most appropriate way. So that would be my recommendation. If we can go forward with that, with the information for the 65, 70, and 75, and then for us to review the ordinance with the recommendations for amendment, and for that information to be reviewed by the CRA before it's brought back.
I would say that we also have to have an opportunity, because we don't have time today, but there may be other ways in which there might be expenses that can be cut down in the CRA, and we have not discussed those, as I said earlier. Commissioner James.
Yes, is the 65 vice chair, 70 and 75 for the beginning stages that you're speaking? I want to be the starting vice chair.
Yeah, those are the three that were brought up. So you brought up 75, I brought up.
No, I'm just asking, is that the starting stage that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to be clear.
Oh, yeah. Yes, just the starting, yes.
Okay, and I guess to answer the chair, because she's saying that we haven't thought of other ways to maybe cut. Maybe we can have a consensus or not, if that is something we want to look into. I'm not here to look into cutting more things out of the CRA. Now, if other people are, if they have a consensus that is, then we can have another conversation.
It's not necessarily cutting. It's looking at other ways in which we can be more efficient.
If it includes cutting anything else from the CRA, I'm not in favor of it. So that's what I'm saying. So I'm not sure if we have a consensus to either even continue a conversation that you don't have support for, or if we do. So I'm just trying to make sure that we are staying focused on things that we're going to come back and discuss, so we can have a boom, boom, boom if that's what this is called, type of a meeting to be very clear on that. So is anyone else?
Whatever you decide on consensus, the bottom line is that I still have the ability to present things to
That's fine.
our finance director without your permission.
That's fine. I know
to
that.
see what we
I
can do
sat in
with
that chair
things.
before. Remember
Thank
that.
you.
When you ran and I ran and you didn't win, I sat in that chair. I know how it goes.
It was the
so
first time I
anyways,
ever
like
tried.
I was
Nobody
saying,
knew me,
mine
so
too.
whatever.
Mine too. First time. Thanks. And so, like I was saying, I wanted to see from the rest of the board if there's consensus to cut other things out to give back to the city or not.
I'm not for that.
It doesn't make a difference because I can still do what I want. So, as far as that's concerned, as far as
Vice
that's
Chair,
concerned,
is there, do you wish to look further into cutting more things out or not? That's the only thing or Board Member Harris okay, Board Member Harris is ignoring me. Vice Chair.
There's not consensus.
Okay, that's all I was asking. That's all I was asking. And so I'm okay with the 65, 70, and 75 as a starting point to go into that, and then we can look. I'm not sure of how soon we want to look into having another workshop and.
Do we want to start looking at dates, or do we need an idea of how long it will take to garner that information and to put it in a package for the board members? Right, but Nikki might have Nikki won't be preparing
That's what I'm saying.
it.
The next person doesn't start to the end of the month.
She's like, yeah, that's right, I
Yeah.
won't be preparing it. She probably has an idea of how long that will take.
It'll take a little bit of time.
Okay.
So I would recommend, our new director doesn't start till the end of the month. We all know that. So give ample time to get their feet wet, kind of get the lay of the land. We are actually currently short-staffed in finance right now as well, because with my departure, the IT manager's departing, the controller's out on FMLA right now. So we are very short-staffed, so all staff in finance are all hands on deck. So, this isn't something, budgets don't start till around March of next year. So it's not a decision you have to make today. You have time. So my recommendation would, at least give 30 days for the new director to come in and kind of get their hands on things and start preparing it. And let them be a part of this process, because this is a legacy and this is something they need to understand thoroughly, and they need to be able to come in and make those recommendations to you and analysis as well.
Okay, I agree with you that this is something that's important, and I don't want to, set a date when the gentleman isn't here yet, and he should be given the time. My other concern is that I do want to prioritize this. I don't want this to get lost in the weeds, as some things do. So, so when he comes on board, I suppose at that time, we can let him know this is a priority, and then we can just set the date or get an idea what the dates
Would be.
through him, and we can come up with it that way. I think that's the quickest way to do it, because if
Go ahead.
I know we can ask the director, but if this gentleman, if he's going to need a little bit more time to do it, how do we just pick a date?
Okay, sorry. She wants to talk.
The bigger
Sorry, when does he start?
I apologize. Go ahead.
October
I have
31st.
a
Yeah, so
potential
it's not-
recommendation. I am not aware, so I want to get clarity at this point, because I know Ms. Satterfield's last official day is today. I'm not sure if she will be contracted through the city to do any additional services, and if so, the CRA could also perhaps contract with Ms. Satterfield as the exiting CRA treasurer to allocate funds so that we can get this analysis done, whether in tandem with the new finance director, or whether this is something that is a project that she has the ability to work on through any consulting agreement that we may be able to have with her. I'm not sure if the intent is for her to continue to provide any services to the city post her official retirement date. So that is one option that would create a little bit more control as far as the timing is concerned. If the new finance director isn't up to speed as of yet, that's an avenue that could be taken.
Mayor, if I may, through the chair.
You may.
So, as Nikki stated, we have our controller that just had a baby, so she's out on baby leave. What's it called? Maternal leave. And our new director starts at the end of the month. So I have been working with Nikki, so you know, on a contractual agreement to be able to put that in place. The goal here is to always have a seamless transition from one director to another director, but we want to make sure that we set everybody up for success, everybody. So what I would recommend is maybe either sometime in mid-December, or we just begin the new calendar year, you know, with a workshop. Because if he starts at the end of October, then we're going to go into Thanksgiving, then we're going to go into the holidays. If we're going to do it, we should do it right and give ourselves some time.
Through the chair, I will likely be on maternity leave myself at that time. So I would like to expedite this process as best as we can, as I would like to be very involved in this discussion and conversation. Thank you.
Then what I would suggest is we hold off on picking a date until the new CFO is here. And then when he gets here, check the schedule and see what his calendar is going to be as far as.
Right, I would just say that it's not done anytime before mid-November.
No,
I
I
mean,
would agree.
there's
And
no way.
And I'm going to have some issues in mid-November.
May I asked her, and I don't know if it's appropriate to ask, so if you want to not answer, that's okay. Do you have any idea of what month you're going out on maternity leave?
I do, and this is actually coming up for discussion on the next CRA board agenda. So I'm looking at maternity leave beginning in mid-December.
Okay.
If all things go according to plan.
Understood.
Okay.
As these things not always do, but
Correct.
hopefully they will.
Correct.
Okay, so from what I understand with the city manager, did she just say mid-November?
She said not before mid-November,
Not
but
before
I have
mid-November.
an issue.
And remember, it's very important, excuse me, through the chair, that we're jumping right on the city audit as well. There's a lot happening, so we want to accommodate everybody's schedule. So
that gives us a 30-day window approximately, but I'd like to, as much as possible, given for error in when maternity leaves sometimes start earlier, as close as we can get in the other direction. But I know you were saying you have.
I have a family issue that's.
Okay. Does that
but
take for all of November?
No, I don't have an exact date yet as to when it's taking
Okay,
place, and that's the
understood,
problem.
understood.
So.
We don't have to make a date.
But it's going to be probably within the first 2 weeks.
range.
Just a minute. What I'm saying is I think it might be best anyway, because if Frank is starting on the 31st, at least we'll know, because we don't even know how he works, and we don't know what's going to be sitting there for him when he comes in. So I think it might be better if we have him come in, get things set, and we can set up the calendar based on that, based on his coming in and seeing what he has coming up. So I
For
understand
November
what you're-
31st?
Again,
No,
we could
November
have
31st.
October 31st.
Well, I'm saying when he comes in October 31st, then maybe that first week that he's here, we can start looking at dates.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying.
So through the chair, again, I just want to reiterate that if this is something that Ms. Satterfield can go ahead and get started working
Correct.
on
That's what I was gonna
through a
say.
contractual arrangement with the CRA, similar to what she will be doing for the city, once the new finance director gets on board, we won't be starting from scratch, trying to A, get him up to speed, and then B, starting the analysis.
Right.
So I think that this is something that, we can get started on now potentially. I don't know what Ms. Satterfield's plans are and what the future workload will be for her. But if she is amenable to providing contractual services to the CRA.
I think we'd have to ask Nikki about that
I think
because
similar to how she will be providing to the city, I think that's something that we can get started on now, even if Mr. What is it? DePaulo will be joining us at a later date, and we can get him up to speed once he gets here.
Nikki, can we ask you a question real quick? I know.
it's not fair to her. It's not fair to her.
I know, but she can say no. She knows how to say no to us. Okay, so is it?
No.
I know. You're so ready.
No.
Okay, so are you going to be providing contractual services to the city for the next?
We have not executed an agreement yet. The professional services that I plan to do are in a limited scope. So I worked a long time to retire, and
know,
I plan
I
to
know.
do it, okay? I'm looking to basically help with the comp and class, and then anything else that's mutually agreed upon. I will not be accessible 24/7. It's going to be very limited scope. I want to make the transition as easy as possible, but this is something that has a lot of long-term effect to it, and I honestly would not feel comfortable doing it without the new director having some input on that as well, and some communication. Again, not something you have to do now. I don't know exactly, we don't start budget process till March, even if this was in February. We're not going to be contributing the money until then, so it's definitely something that can be done. You're only going to have one meeting in November, one meeting in December because of the holidays already. And people are going to be very adverse to probably doing some workshops in between there with the holidays and things like that. I do think it needs ample time because this is going to have, it's not really about calculating what the dollar amount is based on those percentages. It's about the impact it's going to have on the city finances as a whole and where we would look to potentially have to draw those monies from. That's the largest impact, and that's something that I think your new director definitely needs to be involved in.
Okay, so what I heard you say was that
No.
no, you are not interested in working in a very limited scope with the CRA to begin this work.
I have a question about
Understood.
that. Okay.
Commissioner James?
What is Adam's role?
He's
Can
the
he-
assistant finance director.
Right, so can he not provide any numbers or any support to the CRA? Or, I mean, that's,
I haven't even seen the documents that you're looking at right now, so we
I'm only
have to
looking
take a
at what
look
you
at it
gave
and
us.
see.
That's all
Okay,
I'm looking at.
well, we're talking 65%, 75%.
well, yeah, what I'm
80%.
saying is, in
I
any
haven't seen that.
capacity, is it okay that once you're gone, that Adam fills that role temporarily until, I'm sure there are going to be services that the CRA may need from the treasurer.
Again, I'm going to ask for the same considerations we give all the other departments when they are short-staffed, which we've done numerous times. When we had no HR department, finance jumped in wholeheartedly and did a lion's share of the HR department. We do the same thing when other departments are
Correct.
down-staffed
But-
with administrative.
correct. We pick up the
My-
slack.
My request would be that you give the same consideration to finance that's been working very hard for your city for a long time. They are overwhelmed with a lot of work right now with being down close to 3 people.
Okay.
So it's going to be short-term. People are going to be brought on, strong people, in my opinion, that are going to be brought into the city. Once we get a new IT manager brought in and we get our controller back, we're going to be all hands on deck. But I do think this is too important not to make sure that we have the new director involved in it.
Correct. No, I definitely want the new director involved in it. CRA Executive Director, is this something that you have in your current budget to be able to independently start even crunching numbers or seeing the impact? I know you work with a lot of different economic impact type of consultants. I'm not sure if this could be added to their scope or something that they can start and then work together with the new person that's going to be the finance director. What is your recommendation?
Certainly, I think that the new finance director needs to have some involvement. Now, given that he will begin in about a month, I really don't know that his level of contribution in looking at the fiscal impact as we currently have it, I don't know that his contribution is going to be significant in terms of an analysis of where we are. Now, I think that between the outgoing finance director and the interim finance director, that there could be some sort of start to this analysis if it was to be made a priority. Now, I know that, on a case-by-case basis, every department has had to make things a priority as directed by either the commission or by the city manager or even the CRA board to the CRA. You all have determined what is a priority and what should be scheduled ahead of things or behind things, of course, in consultation with those that report to you. Yes, I do think that we could look at our professional services to see if there's someone, if our financial advisor could be able to take a look. We would need to have, full access to the city's budget to take a look at what the expenditures are in terms of services and projections and reserves and all of that. Perhaps the auditor could assist us because they do audit our books as well, or our finances as well. Now, to say that, yes, I agree, the finance department staff is short right now. However, if this is a priority, and for me, this is very much a priority, and it's something that I want to tackle, I don't know that recommending this for February when you knowingly and I knowingly will be on maternity leave. To me, that is saying that there's not a regard for my participation in this process and ensuring that the CRA is able to contribute and take a look at this analysis and be part of the discussion.
You must be here.
Again, can we just hold off until Frank starts? And then we can pick a date then, once he is in place, and we can make a decision then. I still don't know what my November is going to look like right now because I had a death in the family, and we have something that's planned. I don't have a date yet. I will have that information in the next 2 weeks. So if we could just come back, we could when he starts, we could take a look at everything and say within the first week after he starts, we could go back and look at dates, get a better sense of his schedule. Maybe we do it when you come back from maternity leave. That might work too. We don't have to approve budgets until September. There's plenty of time. So it might make more sense just to do it then. That's all. I'm just saying, just hold off on selecting a date until he comes in, and then we can talk to him about his schedule. I'm sure it's a priority for them as well. It's a priority for all of us. And I really think finance needs to be involved.
I'm okay with holding off until the new director gets here, as long as we are doing it before the maternity leave. Maternity leave, I'm sorry, I said that incorrectly. So as long as we are for sure going to do something before our executive director goes on maternity leave, I'm okay with holding off so you can figure out what's going on with your schedule.
Vice Chair.
Although I am going to add in the safety provision, well, yes, I want it to be before the maternity leave. If something happens that requires you to go out early, then I do want to pause the conversation until you return. I'm assuming that's what you would prefer as you want to.
I think that's appropriate.
Okay. So just putting that little asterisk in, that if she goes out sooner than mid-December, that we agree upon that we're not going to resume the conversation until she comes back, and whenever that is. So, is that okay with everyone?
I agree to
All
that.
right. All right. That way we can accommodate everyone's schedules and personal needs.
All right, so with that, we're done, and we'll adjourn.